Hello and welcome to Nice and Blunt. It's Saturday, so it's time to get you ready for the Week 10 slate of games. These are all my injury updates heading into the weekend, and also my top 6 must-start flex plays for Week 10. Okay, so let's run down the list alphabetically with each team in terms of all the players who may or may not suit up this week. So in Arizona, DeAndre Hopkins is questionable, and I do not think that he's going to play. He has not practiced this week, and even though he is a game time decision, I think they're going to sit him out one more time and let him rest up because they're looking like a very secure playoff team, and they want to be healthy for January. However, Kyler Murray is also questionable for the Cardinals, and I do think that he will play. He practiced a little bit on Friday, and I think he will suit up, but I do think he will be a little bit limited. I don't expect many rushing stats from Kyler Murray. In Buffalo, Zack Moss is cleared from the concussion protocol, and he will play. And later in the video, I'm going to tell you just how much I love Zack Moss. But keeping it moving with injuries, Nick Chubb has been ruled out for Sunday with an illness. He is in the COVID protocol, and he's not going to be ready. So upgrade Dearness Johnson, and he is also a player I'm going to mention later in this video. In Dallas, they've activated Michael Gallup for the Cowboys off of IR, and I don't really think this impacts the main players who you're counting on, like CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, or Zeke, but I think Dalton Schultz also is going to be limited a little bit as well. I think his target volume will come down a little bit. And the only player who really benefits, I think, is Dak. I think he's going to have a much better stat line and just be more consistent throwing the ball. In Detroit, Jamal Williams is out, and I don't really think this is a big upgrade for DeAndre Swift. The last time this happened a couple weeks ago, DeAndre Swift had a rough game against the Eagles, so I'm not really changing anything I see for him. I think overall this is just a downgrade for the entire offense. They're not going to be as productive, and this kind of hurts everyone more than it helps them. In Jacksonville, James Robinson is expected to play, and I viewed it this way when I did my rankings, so he stays as my RB15 coming into this week. Not a good matchup against the Colts, and obviously he's not 100%. So I'm lowering my expectations on Robinson just a little bit. He's usually inside my top 12. And then in Kansas City, CEH is still on IR, so that means Darrell Williams will get the start. And he just slots in, takes CEH's spot in my rankings. He's my running back 22 this week. Not the best upside, but a decent flex play, a good floor for him. And then for the Chargers, Keenan Allen is questionable, and I do expect him to play. He was limited in practice on Friday, and it looks like he will be just fine. However, for the Rams, terrible news. Robert Woods is out with a torn ACL. So his year is done, and this definitely shakes things up for the Rams. It's a good thing they added Odell Beckham Jr. Obviously, that's an upgrade for him from what we were expecting, but I think it's going to take some time for that to click. So it's also an upgrade for Van Jefferson. Really unfortunate news. Very sad to hear that. And then in New England, Damian Harris is out with a concussion, and Ramondre Stevenson is his primary backup. However, he is still in the concussion protocol himself. So it's not a guarantee that he plays tomorrow, but if he does get cleared and suits up, he's my running back 25. This is a bad matchup against Cleveland, and I'm not too excited to start the Patriots running back. If he sits, then Brandon Bolden would get the start, and obviously he'd be in flex territory, but he's quite a desperate start against Cleveland. I don't really view him as a clear lock-it-in starter. Only my running back 28 if he is the starter for the Patriots. And then in New Orleans, big news for the Saints, Alvin Kamara is out with a knee injury. So Mark Ingram gets an upgrade, and I will speak about him a little bit later in this video. And then for the New York Jets, Corey Davis is questionable, but I do expect him to play. He missed last week, and I think he'll suit up. So another target for Mike White. I think he'll be decent, but in low-end flex territory. And then Chase Claypool for Pittsburgh has been ruled out. So that it doesn't really affect Najee Harris or Deontay Johnson that much, but I think it's a big upgrade for Pat Freiermuth, who I forgot to rank yesterday in my tight end video. That was pointed out to me in the comments section, and I do apologize for that. But I would have ranked him around tight end 14, but given the news with Claypool, he definitely bumps up into the top 10. He's my tight end 9 this week, just above Dalton Schultz. Then in San Francisco, George Kittle and Elijah Mitchell are both questionable, but I do expect both of them to play, so that's a good sign. And then in Tampa Bay, both Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski have been ruled out. I thought both of them may come back this week. However, that's just not the case. But Chris Godwin's status was also a bit up in the air. He's questionable, but was limited in practice on Friday, and he is expected to play, but it is a game time decision. So you want to monitor his status, but I do feel quite optimistic that he suits up. I don't think he's going to miss this game. And then for Tennessee, Julio Jones is questionable with a hamstring injury that popped up on Thursday. He missed practice on Friday, and I do not think that he's going to play. This is a bad sign, and Julio, we all know that he's not in the prime of his career anymore. He's definitely up there in age, and I think you need to have a backup plan if you were relying on Julio Jones. But he's been pretty bad this year. I doubt you were counting on him too much. And to round out the injury updates, Logan Thomas in Washington is still on IR. They have yet to activate him. So that means Ricky Seals-Jones is still a viable low-end tight end. And he's my number 13 tight end this week, just behind Noah Fant. Not the most upside, but still not the worst floor play you could ask for. So now that I've got those injury updates out of the way, let's talk about my must-start flex plays this week, because I got 6 names who I think deserve to be in your lineup. Let's start with my number 1 must start this week, Dearness Johnson, the running back for the Cleveland Browns. He's my RB10, and on his career with the Browns, he averages 5.2 yards per carry, and as I mentioned earlier, both Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are both ruled out for Sunday. So he only has Demetric Felton to compete with for carries, and I think he's going to put up another massive workload in this game. In week 7, when he was the starter and he had this job to himself, he had 22 rush attempts for 146 yards and a rushing touchdown, and he also caught both of his targets for another 22 yards. So he has the potential to put up 20 plus fantasy points, and I don't think it's unrealistic to expect that from him. He has a great spot this week. And I don't think it's unrealistic to expect that from him because he plays behind one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Don't just take my word for it. I looked this up. According to PFF, Cleveland has the 4th ranked offensive line in the NFL. They are elite, and they are going to show up to make sure Dearness Johnson has plenty of room to run the ball. And against the Patriots, you may be a little bit concerned because to running backs this season, they've only allowed 95 rushing yards per game on 4.3 yards per carry. And through 9 games, they're only allowing 2 rushing touchdowns to running backs on the season. So it may be a little bit unlikely that he gets into the end zone, but I think the floor for Dearness Johnson is really high. You can count on him, and I want him in my lineup. I picked him up on both of my rosters, and I'm starting him on both as well. But the next player who I have as a must start this week is Mark Ingram, my running back 13 of the New Orleans Saints. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, Alvin Kamara has been ruled out with a knee injury, so Mark Ingram has the opportunity to step up and immediately becomes a high upside, high floor running back too. Now look, he has some bad stats this year with the Texans, but obviously he's going to get a lot more touches in this game, so those stats don't really count. But the encouraging stat is that in the 5 games this season that he's seen at least 10 plus touches, he averages 62.2 yards per game. So that's a pretty decent floor, and most of those yards come rushing the ball. In his 2 games with the Saints this year, he's caught all of his targets, and he's catching 3.5 receptions per game. He's also running the ball quite well. With the Saints, he averages 4.7 yards per carry, and that's definitely above average. And both of those, he played with Alvin Kamara on the field. So the workload is going to be there because with Alvin Kamara out, it opens up 22.3 touches per game, and Kamara was seeing over 5 targets a game. So I think you can really count on Mark Ingram this week. And obviously he's not a top 5 running back. He's definitely not in the prime of his career anymore, but he has the potential to win you your week, and he offers an extremely safe floor that is hard to find outside the top 15 at running back. This is a bad matchup against Tennessee, so New Orleans may struggle. However, we've seen what Latavius Murray can do in the past whenever Alvin Kamara has been ruled out with injury, and I think you should trust Mark Ingram. Lock him into your lineup as a top 15 running back in week 10. But let's pivot to wide receiver and stay in the realm of safety. My wide receiver 21 this week is Hunter Renfrow of the Las Vegas Raiders. His per game stats through 8 games this season are pretty consistent. 7.5 targets per game, that ranks as wide receiver 31, and he's catching 5.6 receptions per game. That ranks as wide receiver 18. So a very high catch percentage for Renfrow. You know that Derek Carr can rely on him. He's only turning that into 56 yards per game, though. That only ranks as wide receiver 42, and his touchdown stats are pretty average, only 0.38 touchdowns per game. That ranks as wide receiver 30, and altogether 10.7 half PPR points per game, also ranks as wide receiver 30. So he's a very average, safe flex play. Definitely prefer him in a full PPR league, but still has a very good floor even in a half PPR format. His week 9 stats, however, last week with Henry Ruggs out of the lineup were pretty good. He had a big workload, 9 targets, 7 receptions, only 49 yards, but he also caught a touchdown, so he paid off in fantasy. Now look, obviously he is a floor play because of those low yards per reception numbers, but I think he is the clear number 2 target for Derek Carr these days behind Darren Waller, and I have high expectations for the Raiders in this primetime matchup on Sunday night against the division rival Kansas City Chiefs. In his last 4 home games against the Chiefs, Derek Carr averages 294 passing yards per game and also 2.5 passing touchdowns per game. So I think that he's going to rely on Hunter Renfrow. The Chiefs' defense has been atrocious this season, but recently they have been showing some signs of life. However, they still rank 7th worst in overall defense in the NFL, so not a team that scares you. And last week was against Jordan Love, so that doesn't really count. Let's be honest here. The Chiefs still don't scare you on defense. So I trust Hunter Renfrow. I really want him in my lineup. He's one of the best flex plays you can have this week. Another wide receiver who I think must be in your lineup this week is Tyler Lockett, my wide receiver 22. And despite his struggles this season, Tyler Lockett is still averaging 12.1 half PPR points per game, and that ranks as wide receiver 24 on a per game basis. But with Russell Wilson set to return after missing 3 games, you know that he's going to be very hungry and full of energy. I believe that Tyler Lockett is going to burn the Packers for at least 1 deep bomb in this game. You know they're going to have their hands full with DK, and in my gut, I just feel it. I know that Russell Wilson is going to be looking for Tyler Lockett down the field, and I really think that they're going to connect on one of those deep shots this week. Now look, we haven't seen it from Tyler Lockett since week 2, but in my opinion, that just means that he's due for one of those big plays. On Sunday, I believe that Tyler Lockett is going to make the highlight reel, and you want him in your lineup. I just feel it. Maybe you think I'm full of shit, but I don't care. I got Tyler Lockett on one of my teams, and there is no way I am benching him. But those players are kind of reliable and more obvious picks. Let's say you're a little bit more desperate and scraping the bottom of the barrel. Here are 2 names who I think have a chance to blow up for more than 25 points this week, but usually carry a lot of risk, and it may be a little bit difficult to put them in your lineup. The first player I feel very confident about is Zack Moss, my running back 18 this week. As I mentioned earlier in the video, he was cleared from the concussion protocol, and that was really the only thing I was waiting for because, damn, I can't wait to start Zack Moss this week. Now, look, he carries a lot of risk. He is very touchdown dependent, and he actually hasn't scored a touchdown since week 4. So when you look at his stats in those games, they're not encouraging. He's only averaging 7 half PPR points per game. Granted, last week he did suffer a concussion earlier in the game and did not return. So that's the risk that comes with Zack Moss. If he doesn't score a touchdown, it's almost impossible that he puts up 10 half PPR points. However, this week, he goes up against the New York Jets, and the Jets defense is one of the best matchups for opposing running backs. On the season, they're allowing 133 rushing yards per game. That ranks 27th in the NFL. But let's look a little bit closer. In the last 5 games, to running backs specifically, not counting the rush yards that they give up to quarterbacks or on jet sweeps, any of that, to running backs in the last 5 games, they're giving up 137 rushing yards per game on 5.4 yards per carry. And in those 5 games, they've also allowed 10 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs. So the odds that Zack Moss scores are really high. And honestly, I feel like he's probably going to score 2 touchdowns in this game. Now look, that's not a guarantee, but if it happens, it wouldn't shock me at all, and I don't think it would surprise you either. We saw what not only Jonathan Taylor did last week against the Jets, but also Nyheim Hines. And if you want to chase the matchups and you're looking for a high upside running back, Zack Moss is the player you want. There's no running backs who are outside my top 10 rankings this week who have a better matchup for fantasy purposes this week than Zack Moss, and I think you need him in your lineup. He is the best flex play you can have pretty much a guarantee to score a touchdown. And then the last player I'm going to bring up in this video is Van Jefferson, my wide receiver 25 in week 10. Now, the main reason I have him ranked this high, unfortunately, is because Robert Woods suffered a torn ACL in practice. And while Odell Beckham Jr. is set to make his debut for the Rams this Sunday, I think the player who benefits the most is definitely Van Jefferson. I understand that OBJ is the big name, the new acquisition, and they're probably going to have a few designed plays to get him involved. However, I just really think that Jefferson is the player who needs to step up in order to replace Robert Woods. Jefferson's the one who knows the system. He's been on the team all season long, and he has the pre-existing connection with Matthew Stafford. Like we've seen in the past, when Josh Reynolds has filled in for Brandon Cooks or Robert Woods or whoever, the next man up in this wide receiver core produces pretty consistent, safe fantasy stats, and I think Sean McVay wants to get Van Jefferson involved. I think in this Week 10 matchup against the 49ers, they may focus a little bit too heavily on Cooper Kupp and OBJ, and Van Jefferson can slip past the defense and be forgotten about on one play or two and take one to the house from well outside the red zone. He's going to be a key contributor on play action, and let's look at the stats that Woods was putting up. With Woods unavailable, there are now 7.7 targets per game, 0.56 touchdowns per game, and 12.5 half PPR points per game that are now available for the Rams and their receivers. Jefferson, on average this year in 9 games, was putting up 5.1 targets per game. That ranks as wide receiver 64, only catching 3.0 receptions per game, ranks as wide receiver 66, but he was putting up 48.1 yards per game on average, ranks as wide receiver 53, because of an incredibly high 16.0 yards per reception, ranked 18th in the NFL among all wide receivers. His touchdown rate was pretty average, only 0.33 per game, ranks as wide receiver 40, and on a per game basis, only 8.3 half PPR points per game, ranks as wide receiver 48. But I think out of Woods' 7.7 open targets, Jefferson is going to get at least 3 of them. So based on that, I'm projecting 8 targets for Van Jefferson. He's going to catch 5 of them for 70 yards. And if his touchdown rate remains the same at 0.33, then I'm projecting 11.9 half PPR points for Van Jefferson this week. And that would rank as wide receiver 25 on a per game basis this year. So that's why I have him ranked as my wide receiver 25. It's not just a random number that I pulled out of a hat. And the only thing that concerns me is whether or not he scores a touchdown. If he does, I think he's definitely going to pay off as a top 20 wide receiver, but that may not happen. So he may just be a good floor play. He's one of the best flex options I think you can have at the wide receiver position. And his floor is really secure regardless of whether or not he scores a touchdown. All right, so that's going to wrap up this video. Hopefully I'm going to edit it in time and it's not out too late. But if you got a start-sit decision that you're not fully 100% on, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. I'll try and get to it as quickly as possible. I guarantee you I will get to it before Sunday's games take place. But if you enjoyed this video and want more Nice and Blunt content, make sure that you subscribe to this channel and like this video for more. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you so much for watching Nice and Blunt.